by our early patriots who established the first juridical document, which was the Declaration of Independence. And a few years ago, as I was rereading the Declaration of Independence, I was astonished at the similarity that the colonists charged King George III for with what King George IV, George W. Bush, could be charged with. And I just want to give you a few examples of that. They charged King George III with the following, quote, "He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good." Well, look at George W. Bush, preeminent presidential outlaw in American history. The American Bar Association, composed of many conservative Republican lawyers, in 2005-2006 sent him 3 papers charging him with serious and continual violations of our Constitution. 3 systemic, serious, continual violations of our Constitution, including spying on Americans without judicial approval. George W. Bush has made a career out of flouting our Constitution, war invasions without declarations of war by Congress, that's one of them, violating U.S. federal statutes and international treaties like the Geneva Convention, through his systemic torture, his imprisonment of many Americans without charges and without allowing them the sacred writ of habeas corpus. He has also had signing statements as if he was a monarch, saying hundreds of times, "I will sign this bill that Congress has passed, but I will decide whether to enforce it or not, or whether to obey it or not," including John McCain's anti-slavery legislation. That's a high crimes and misdemeanors. And of course, the criminal war of aggression in Iraq. 5 systemic, daily, high crimes and misdemeanors by George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and their cabinet officials. This is not a one-time Watergate burglary that got Nixon out. This is not lying under oath about sex that almost got Clinton out. This is the most systemic, criminally recidivistic White House in American history, toward which the Democratic majority in Congress, when they took control in 2007, pronounced as their first pronouncement that impeachment was off the table. That is in effect giving the go signal for more criminally recidivistic illegality by the Bush administration. The Declaration of Independence had these words as well about King George III. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent of laws for establishing judiciary powers. End quote. Who has mocked and flouted the courts in our country, which occasionally have risen to a triumphant denunciation of his rule as unconstitutional? Who has flouted the courts? Who has indicated more contempt for the courts, as George W. Bush has? By enacting the Patriot Act, can you imagine using the word patriot for legislation that he signed into law that allows government snoopers to break and enter into your home, sneak and peek it's called, and search your home without a judicial warrant, and only after 72 hours do they have to inform the court? That allows Bush's snoopers to go into your library records to find out what you've been reading, and then if your librarian tells you that the FBI, ordered by George W. Bush to look in your library records, was so doing, the librarian could be prosecuted under the Patriot Act and sent to jail. The Declaration of Independence has this segment. Listen to the comparisons. They accuse King George III in the following words, quote, "He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy, totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation," end quote. They never dreamed that a country that never threatened us, that a country that was invaded unconstitutionally, illegally, in violation of international law by the monarch, King George IV, with a loss of over 1 million innocent Iraqi civilian lives and 4,200 American soldiers and 100,000 injured American soldiers, would be the consequence of what they thought and what they described as posterity, as the beneficiaries of their valiant achievement starting in this area of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in 1775. The Declaration of Independence continues with this gem. Quote, they accused King George III, quote, "for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury," end quote. That was the second demand by our revolutionaries against King George III. I'll get to the first in a moment. And what is King George IV doing? He's advancing something by the oxymoronic name of tort reform, which in effect begins closing the courtroom doors to wrongfully injured and defrauded Americans from having their full day in court before judge and trial by jury as accorded them by the 7th Amendment to the Constitution. He has been, since he was governor of Texas, an aggressive door closer for state and federal courts. Exactly what our early patriots stood tall against when they revolted against King George III, who was trying to give them the ultimate deprivation in their eyes, which was stripping them of the right of trial by jury of their peers, which they believed was the ultimate bulwark against government tyranny. Now, what was the first complaint of our early patriots? It was no taxation without representation is what they wanted, but their complaint was taxation without representation. What have we seen in the last 4 weeks? A gigantic $700 billion bailout of Wall Street crooks, speculators, and swindlers, looting and draining trillions of dollars from worker pension funds, mutual funds, and the lifetime savings and retirement of the American people. A $700 billion bailout by Washington and Wall Street in sheer violation of our early patriots' heightened concern, which is taxation without representation. Congress and the White House, Democrat and Republican alike, did not have public hearings where they brought in the best minds of our country about what to do, about the dominoes effect from the Wall Street ricochet regarding homeowners, consumers, workers, and taxpayers. They didn't even have the decency to go back home before Bush stampeded them into this reckless deprivation of our children and grandchildren's liability, and tax integrity, because that's who's going to pay for it.